What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another exciting episode. Again, we have the great Manny Chee of Manny Chee Outdoors with us today. And as we always do, we're going to be talking about glide baits, but not specifically the glide baits themselves, but more about how to get more bites if you guys have been struggling with getting bites on glide baits. It's something that you and I have both seen. A lot of like beginners are kind of struggling where they're always complaining like, oh, I only get followers, or they're just kind of nipping at it. They're not really eating it. What do you guys recommend? So today we're pretty much going to give you guys 3 tips on just having better success on glide baits, whatever you guys are fishing at. So if you guys are ready, let's go. All right, guys, welcome back. We have Manny Chee of Manny Chee Outdoors, and we are talking about glide baits, one of our favorite ways of catching bass.
Yeah.
We've been fishing glide baits now for a decade, more than
Maybe it's been that long.
a really long time. And so
a whole age gap of ours.
A whole generation, basically.
Yeah.
And so we've seen it all. We've seen the fallers, we've seen the biters, we've seen the ones that are nipping at it, we've seen giant fish eat it, we've seen small fish eat it. And so we've gone pretty much our whole glide bait fishing, just experiencing all these different ways. And then both you and I have taken out, well, he takes out actual clients, and I take out friends that just want to get into fishing like swim baits. And you know, there's a lot of things that we both see that guys will do when fishing these glide baits. And we're pretty much going to go through some of those that we've seen today to help you guys just catch more fish if you guys are struggling on slide swimmers or any other glide baits that you guys fish. So the first thing that we are going to talk about is the placement of where we are throwing these glide baits. Now, a glide bait does have a lot of drawing power, and that can come into a big play, right?
Absolutely.
So we see a lot of guys do, whether they're fishing ponds or fishing lakes, they're throwing that thing out in the middle of nowhere, right? And in some of these bodies of water, they can be pretty clean, like 10, 15 foot visibility. Some of these other places are 3 to 4. But just throwing your glide bait out in the open, you are going to get followers. Like, that's a guarantee, because the drawing power of these baits is incredible. But there's not a whole lot of incentive for those fish to just eat it, right? Because it's just out in open water. And so one of the things that we see a lot of guys is not make the right cast to the right piece of cover or in the right areas to actually get bites. So both you and I out here on our lakes, we'll just first talk about walls, because it's one of the best places to understand where placement plays into a big key factor. How do you like to fish walls?
So when I first started with these baits, one of the things that I thought was like, kind of at first, like you said, like, well, these giant swim baits, they're probably throwing them out into like wide open water, the middle of the lake. Instead of fishing the shoreline or these points, I'm going to just throw it out into the middle of the lake, because like that's probably where big ones are, since I've never seen them on my other stuff. So at first it was like throwing them out into the middle of the lake. And then you kind of started realizing, like you said, like, especially at that time, it had a huge amount of draw power. You'd have them come in, and really, like, when you understand the basics, it's like, well, wait, the bass is an ambush predator. It's not a tuna. It's not going to overcome its prey by like running it down over and over and tiring it down and then eating it. It has to conserve its energy and make a big push, but very small. A lot of energy and a small waste of it. So once you kind of adapt that to your fishing, you realize that a lot of it's not just reading the water and understanding where the bass would hang out, but where your bait needs to start its journey from. Where you need to start that cast, which is, for me, like, be on the target. Set up, you come tight to your bait, you get it working. That all requires like a few feet of line. So if you're just thinking like, before I would like throw a jig or a worm like right where I thought the bass would be, like oh, that little pocket right here, that's an awesome cast. And with the swim bait, like, that's a blown cast. Because now you've landed on them, you're splashing, you're coming to, and then by the time you're actually going into like a eatable rhythm with it, it's already
so far away.
It's already out of its strike zone. And I think especially like here in Arizona, the strike zones are very small because our waters can get very deep very quickly.
Yes.
So, 10 feet off the shoreline, we can be in 40 feet of water. Mm-hmm. So it's not like a gradual type of play here, Mm-hmm. So yeah, going to the walls, when I looked at it, I thought, okay, this isn't working just throwing out in the middle of nowhere. So let me go to places where I've been bit in the past, like where I've seen or connected with the biggest fish ever. And like some of those were on jigs, throwing them at the wall. And we would line up 90 degrees, we would throw it at the wall and let it kind of, hit something, a little shelf, and then pop, and it would make its way down. They're like 20, 30, to 40-foot walls. And we would fish them like that. So I thought, okay, like if that's where I kind of have seen my biggest bites ever at this lake, let me take these baits and throw them at them. I started it like that though, with a 90-degree presentation where it's like, ooh, that's probably where a fish is. And then I'd start bringing them out. And again, real quickly, I'm in open water, 40, 60 feet of open water.
Yep.
And I have this fish that's following, but he's like, I'm interested, but I know that like I don't have a chance. So there's no point in me like chasing this thing down. Mm-hmm. So when it was actually like a fish that taught me. It was just a regular 6-pounder that taught me like, oh, that's how you want to present this thing, which took me to like the ideas of with like spinnerbaits, where it's like you want to hit you want to be hitting the structure with it, right? Yep. Or like a crankbait where you're hitting the structure. So I thought, okay, how do I apply that to this glide bait? And what I thought was, casting it to that wall in a moderate position where I can still kind of see them. At this time, it's like subsurface where we're catching them. And what I learned was to really like pin the bait to the wall. Yeah. So like it was one time that I was actually like, okay, exaggeratedly, I'm going to make it
hit into the wall.
Hit the wall actually. Like make sure that I'm completely hitting the wall on one of those glides. And yeah, this fish came up and like there was no following, there was no like dipping and diving, there was no teasing of them. It just took its mouth, took my slice swimmer, and shoved it into the wall.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh, big light bulb went on. Like that's the key here. Like it needs to pin it to the wall. So like that eliminates one place where that bait can run off to. You can't run off anymore into the wall.
Yep.
So that's how it started for me with the walls. From there, I applied it to basically every other random shoreline, boulder, grass edge, depth, rocks, sand, transitions of sand or rock. Whatever it is, cast like I wanted to be a little bit beyond that, and really like the bait coming into that zone or hitting that structure.
Yeah,
and that's what changed it up for me on the walls.
Yeah, and going kind of back to what he was saying, like when you have that wall, there is a certain, I feel like at least the way that I look at bass, there's a certain distance that a fish is like, all right. I know if a bait is just 5 feet out, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
3 feet out, maybe. But if it's a foot right here in front of my face, that's super easy and I can get it. So what I've seen is there will be a bass position in an ambush spot. And there's a school of shad going by.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of like going around him a little bit. But the one that's on the outside closest to him is the one that he goes in and grabs.
Yeah.
So getting your bait as close to that strike zone will just eliminate extra factors in the bass's mind of like, is it worth going out and getting this bait or a trout or whatever it is? So you want to eliminate all of those little factors of like, well, is it too far out? Is it going too fast? If you can just limit it down to like very small things where a fish can like say no to, more likely you're going to have bites like what he's had. I took out Ben and we fished a local wall. He had something exactly like that where he's fishing a slide swimmer down a wall and it's super tight. The boat's right up against the wall and same thing, just a 6-pounder, just T-bone it up against the wall. And before, it's like you can have a little leeway, but not this huge amount. You don't need to be slamming your bait into it, but as close as you possibly can with feeling confident or not risking like, oh, well, I don't want the bait to hook or break off or whatever weird reason. But that's kind of going to depend on you guys. But that's how we have fished walls and have had success. Even now, I see a lot of guys where their boat is so far off of the wall, which you'll see a guy and a walls will be like here and a guy's boat's out here. and he'll make that cast, and his bait's gonna run for about 15 feet up against the wall, and then
separate.
Now, you can get bites when it separates because they're like, oh, like the bait's escaping. This is going to be my shot. But I do notice that if you have that bait right super tight, you are going to get some extremely aggressive bites that way.
Yeah, you're working it the whole time.
If you're fishing by yourself, it's so much easier to have the boat here and you're not screwing the guy in the back. Yeah. But if you are fishing with somebody, I can understand why your boat's here. But just understanding you want that bait to ride up against the wall as much as you possibly can to get those fish just to absolutely commit it.
Yeah. One big thing that like Ben Donati always taught me early on was like when it comes to swim baits, you want to almost think like you want to make this cast present that bait to the fish where it's just too easy and they can't say no. Like there's no reason to say no. It's kind of like you were saying. Like, you want the least amount of resistance for them to where they're like, oh, this is falling into my play. A lot of it too, I'd say I learned just from being out there and watching and looking in the water. You'll see them like come up and hunt on those walls, and it almost looks silly what they do because they'll come up and like I see like the fins will start, they like hover and spot, but they're kind of excited like and then they just back up, but then they're like, position this way now. Yeah. And then, move a little bit and sit there and like, is it coming? Is it coming? And I think like that was actually watching them actively hunt. And you realize that like, they know how that bait funnels through. They know how things swim by the edge. So when something's further out, it's either not interesting or it's just not really natural. Right. It's not doing what it should.
And this applies for, like you said, a wide variety of different things. You don't have to have straight vertical walls like we have. This applies to docks or rocks or,
even an urban pond, like the edge of an urban pond. That's creating a wall.
So just think about how a fish would want to pin a lure to a certain area and then just fish that with a glide bait. So, fishing these urban spots, one of the urban spots that I grew up on, it's just pretty much a bath where there's nothing going around. There's nothing at all.
No points.
There's no points. There's really nothing to it. There is like some rock piles, but they're so shallow and they got so much pressure. The fish didn't really care for them. But what I had noticed, kind of what you were talking about, is just watching the fish behavior. I would watch fish, and around the cement wall, the bass would actually corral bluegill or shad up against the cement wall where you're standing. And you'd watch bass just cruise down it and then like be like this and just wait for a bluegill to come a little bit off that wall to eat it. And so it doesn't have to be like this incredible body of water with all these different pin spots. Your urban spots are going to do the same exact thing. You just have to figure out where they like to pin the bait, bluegill, trout, or whatever, and pretty much replicate that with a glide bait. Now, there are some instances of throwing out in the middle of nowhere that we have gotten bit. Where at that urban spot, what I figured out is there was two particular spots where they like to pin stuff. It was either up against that cement wall or to the surface. And so the surface creates another one of those. There's nowhere for the fish to go, right? So if you're able to get those followers to commit, some of the best things that you can do is actually get that glide bait to come further up to the surface. Where some of these glide baits are getting down 5 feet and staying there. If you can kind of like rip it up like an escape motion where it's going up to the surface, sometimes that can also trigger a fish where it's like, oh, it's going all the way to the top. Like it can't go any further. The surface acts as a wall. Or a pin spot basically, and fish can come up and eat it from there. Now it becomes a whole nother thing when we're syncing up glide baits. That's a whole nother ball game that's way more complicated that we're not going to dive into because that's a little more secretive. But you guys can figure that part out. But just understanding, figure out what your bass like to pin, whatever they like to feed on the forage to, and then replicate that with a glide bait.
And of course, like your swim, you're going to want to have your swim dialed in, your presentation, being ready for a bite, your rod position, like, what happens if something eats here? Where do I set the hook? You're close to a wall, your boat's there. Like you need to kind of have these things ready to like tactically go so that when it happens, it's just muscle memory instead of like, oh no, I didn't want to hit the rod.
Or
I
whatever.
didn't want to hit the rock with the
the
rod.
rod's
And
over here.
your net's here and the trolling motor. And
Yeah.
like set yourself up right on your boat or on the shoreline or whatever, so that you're like tactically prepared. If something happens, it's just boom, muscle memory of knowing exactly what where your hook set's going to go, how you're going to fight them in. Like think about that all before it's even happening.
Yep. All right, so the second tip that we are going to go over is retrieve. And I think retrieve is one of the biggest things
it's
when
critical.
it really comes down to it.
It makes all the difference.
So you have your pin spot, right? And you figured it out like, all right, on my lake, there's a certain overhanging tree. This is where they like to feed, or there's a dock or whatever. You're at an urban spot and there's like, oh, there's a big garbage can or whatever in the water. Now it comes down to the retrieve. You've made a cast past the spot. Now, how are you going to approach with your bait to that retrieve? Now, I see a lot of guys, which they just kind of will reel it or they'll burn it too fast or just, it's all over the place. And this is definitely more of a, trial and error,
Trial and error, time on the water. There's no magic thing that me and Jeffrey can tell you, like, swim it this way and it'll work on everywhere across the United States.
Yeah.
There's definitely things that me and you would probably do, whether, if you put us out on the lake in the middle of somewhere we've never been, there's some go-to things that I would say I would start with as a base level.
Yes.
To like, okay, let me put the time on the water in this way that I know, and from there, let the fish kind of tell me. Yeah. Have your polarized glasses. Have, be looking in the water. Be ready. Be always kind of trying to figure out, like, if a fish followed, what did that tell me? Like, how did that help me, like, unlock this area of what I need to do the next time to present it right? Or, like, what makes these fish tick? Sometimes it is just, like, a matter of the bait hanging in that zone. That action is enough. Like, that's the action it needs. Sometimes it needs to, like, look like it's going away from it. Some lakes feel like, like Pleasant out here feels like they need to chase at this extreme level.
Yes.
And then other places, it's like, it's not even like that. They're just going to eat it or they're not, and like, there's no magic thing. No. But I would say that my base to start with would be that typical swim that we've talked about, we've shown videos about on your channel. And it's kind of a side to side, like showing me that side. What I used to tell people is like, show me that fillet. I want to see that fillet. I don't want to see its head coming at me. I want to see it like cutting. Yeah. And whether that's a fast cut or a slow or a hang, like that all changes. And of course that's all day to day, water to water, that all changes, but you can adapt and learn from what the fish tell you.
Right. Yeah.
And what will be the specific thing at your water that gets them to go.
So going back to like your glide. Now, when he says that, he's not just saying glide, 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 glide. Like, he's not doing that. Like how I think we both fish ours is like glide, 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 glide.
Yeah.
Glide, glide. There's a rhythm to it. There's differences in it. So it'll glide, 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 glide.
I used to tell people, like, think of your whole cast as like you're being watched the whole time, right? Like, pretend like from the minute it hit the water, it's being watched. And what I would, sometimes we're doing parallel, sometimes we're casting out deeper and then working it into that zone. And I think what I would always tell people is kind of imagine, like, you're a fish at first, kind of calmly coming around, like maybe seeking refuge. Oh, I see that tree up ahead. I think I'm going to hang out under that because it's got a little shade and this and that. But at the same time, as you start getting close to it, you got to think like, a little prey animal. He's not always just enjoying life. He's kind of always like looking around and making sure that something else isn't going to eat him. So I would tell people, like, maybe at first it starts off calm, but then as you're getting to that little point where you think the fish could be, like, almost act like it's being followed right now. Like, make it a little nervous, make it kind of be, jittery. Jittery and not think straight. And the fish will see that too and be like, oh, something's wrong with this dude.
Yeah,
like, he's nervous. Yeah. And it seems, if you've ever had a fish tank, any little minute, like, weakness in a fish, the other fish eat him. Yeah, the other fish eat him. You wake up and you're like, where's that other fish? He's gone. Yeah. Because something happened, some little fin was off. And fish really like look at that. I feel like fish are real tuned into finding, like, when one has a weakness, I got a chance at eating him. That's better than when he's at 100%. Yeah. Yeah. So that whole cast, like, Imagine the whole thing being watched and being played. And as you're, even though I don't see a follow, or even, I might be 40 feet underwater, I might be subsurface, play that whole nervousness all the way through. And that seems to get the
bites.
If it doesn't work, it's a lot of fun.
Right. Yeah. So basically exactly what he said is how I go about it. And like you said, kind of backtracking a little, is it does change from day to day. I mean, it seemed like that very fast, erratic swim was getting me a lot of bites for certain periods of the month or of the year at different water temps or whatever it was. They were just eating it really good. But recently, for the past 2 years, I'd say, or the past year or so, I've really slowed down and I've noticed I've gotten more bites. And what made me change was fishing my baits fast, and I was getting fallers.
Yeah.
And I was like, something I'm doing isn't right. I made the right cast. I'm in the right zone because I'm getting fish. They're following it, but there's just something I'm not doing. And so I changed.
What behavior did you see in the fish that made you think go slow instead of fast?
Well, for whatever reason, is sometimes I just feel like if the fish are seeing fast all of the time, if you're fishing a body of water where a lot of guys are just fishing fast in general, whether it is with a crankbait or a jig or something like that, I think they pick up on that, and especially with swim baits. Like, they'll see if something go by really quickly, and they might try and track it down, but they're not going to eat it. So I was already going fairly fast, so I was like, let me just try slowing it down, because that has worked for me in the past. Yeah. And slowing down where it would be like a glide, and let the bait hang there for like a second or 2 seconds, and then glide it again.
So like right before the bait starts,
right before the
falling,
bait starts sinking.
Even though to us it looks very natural that it falls horizontal, a fish don't usually just.
Yeah.
So
it's right before it starts sinking.
Right before it starts sinking, you cut it again.
Yep. Boom. And so, I was fishing a newer slide swimmer, and basically to get the sink rate that I wanted to be able to fish it like that, I actually had to tune it, and I just drilled out some weight out of the front cavity to where it was like a super slow sink. So then before, you'd glide it and then boom.
Yeah.
And then you'd glide it and then boom. Now it was like glide. And then it would start going, and then glide. And then it'd start going down. So like right before it goes down, you just start letting it hang there. Yeah. Letting it hang there. And then kind of the same thing where it's like, once I get to that piece of cover, I'll do like a quick 1, 2, and then just let it hang there. And 9 out of 10 times they just tick. Yeah. And that tick, it's not like a full on like crashing on it. Basically what that's doing is the fish, they're following it, right? And then you do that little 1, 2, and the fish have been following it. And once you do that little 1, 2 to be like, oh, the bait's gonna escape or it's getting away, the fish will come up and they'll just suck on it. Yeah. It's like do suck. And that suck, if you're using like lighter hooks, will suck up and you hook that fish. Yeah. Almost every single time. And if you don't, because I've been using much smaller hooks on my glides, if they miss it, they didn't feel the hook, so they're like, oh fuck, I missed it. And I felt like
that's a good one. Yeah.
I felt like when they missed it, they were like, fuck, I've already gone so much energy, I've blown my cover, and this thing is still here, I'm gonna even hit it harder. So normally if you would miss one and you just kind of kept your composure and just like, oh fuck, I missed one. You're like, oh, I just got bit.
Keep glide.
Glide. And then like another like little 1, 2, they'd come back and they'd hit it twice as hard. Because they're like, fuck you, dude, I miss you. Yeah. Bam.
It seems like a very largemouth thing to like have this big ego on like, once they plant the attack, like they want that thing to happen. Yes. Like, and if you make them airball, or like you said, they hit it, but it's not dead yet, it's still going, it like elevates them, and you see this whole other level of aggression come out of them, where like other fish, like a smallmouth, I've experienced a lot different, where they'll shoot out like 30 feet, miss it, and just, gone. I'm gone. Yeah. Like, there's no hard feelings. Like, just, no worries, I got energy.
So weird.
Where a largemouth, like once he's already put that much in, like you said, as long as something unnatural like a hook strike or something doesn't happen, or they see the boat, you can probably get another chance, and it'll always be like double the like it'll be
they'll hit it
real
even
connect,
harder,
you know, or like really go for the head part. And
So just slowing down, I noticed that I was getting those types of bites. While before I would fish the bait and I'd get the followers, and I'm like, I'm just not doing something. So the one thing that I changed was the retrieve, because everything else was still the same besides the retrieve. So,
and you said smaller hooks. Like what size are you throwing?
So like on a slide swimmer 250, I was fishing a size 2 ST45, and so it's a pretty small hook. I wish I had them, but really small hook, and it's a lightweight hook. So when the fish do come up and eat it, since they do, you want them to do the suck.
Like, that's how they eat. Yeah,
because
and like, what do they say? Like a gallon of water or more. Around
that bait back, right?
And goes in.
And when that happens, that hook will just suck up, and then every time I've hooked them is in one of the corners of the mouth.
Oh, nice.
And so the hook is it's small, but it hooks them really good, and the back hook also gets them somewhere too. And so I found that
the grappler
downsizing the hooks allowed me to even get more bites in a sense, because if they did miss it, then they just come back and hit it again even harder.
And with that, are you doing anything with the split rings? Is that the same size, or doubling them, or doing any of those?
So I would also
new styles.
downsize the split rings. So it all kind of just depends on the exact tune that you want. So the one slide swimmer that I was fishing with that I tuned, it was very finicky to add in line, water temp, the hook size, and the split rings. And then where I left it off at was basically exactly where I wanted it to. So I was using a slightly smaller split ring, that smaller hook, 20 pound fluorocarbon, and it synced really, really good. Kind of like this.
Do you remember what that split ring size was?
I think it was an underground, I think it was a size 3.
A size 3?
Yeah. And so if you want that bait to hang there, just try swapping out hooks and split rings sometimes, and it'll lighten the bait up. But overall, when it comes down to retrieve, you're going to have to play with it, watch the fish behavior, and just try new things out. If you were getting bit for a long time on one retrieve and they stopped eating it,
time to switch.
It's time to switch to a different glide, or just slow it down, or try something different, because they should still eat it. I mean, as much as I'm not a huge fan of the slide swimmer like I used to be, they still eat the thing.
Oh yeah.
It still gets bites. And so where I've gone when I fish the slide swimmer is like, I know they'll eat it, but they've seen it a million times, but what is it going to be different? Or how am I going to make it look different than all the other slide swimmers?
How are you going to make it look right?
Sometimes just slowing it down will get you some bites. All right, so the third and last tip is pretty much sometimes they don't want to eat this size. Sometimes we've gone upsize from a slide swimmer 250 to a hinkle trout, and boom.
I think for me it's more upsizing than downsizing.
Yeah, I've seen that too. I think a lot of guys are obviously intimidated, like, they're not eating this, I've got to downsize to something smaller. And it's like, actually sometimes going up to that bigger size will just bring out a different kind of instinct in the fish. Yeah. It's like
a different weight class too. It's like a different size shows up.
It's very strange, but I've fished against guys where I'm throwing like a hinkle trout, and they're fishing with a slide swimmer 250. All the fish in the lake only had eyes for that hinkle trout for whatever reason. And it could be from just the size of the bait or what they're eating that day.
Right.
But it almost seems like every time I've gone to that bigger size, the aggressiveness and the way that they look and try and eat it is wildly different than a slide swimmer or anything smaller in that class range.
Yeah, I think like that, and then I always like listen to people say they like, oh, I downsized and started catching the snot out of them. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Like, I wish I could do that too. Like, I have a mental block.
Right.
But like it also changes like seasonally.
Yes.
You know, like there's a time when in the winter it seems like more correct biologically, I would say, to like try to feed them one meal that's bigger. as those water temps heat up and other bait fish become apparent. All of a sudden our bluegills show up out of nowhere in the spring, and that's when I would like downsize, right? Or different profile, different kind of look to it, just to get them to connect a little better.
Yeah. What I've noticed is it also depends on the main forage on the lake. So he mentioned Lake Pleasant a little earlier. That lake and those fish are very different from like a Saguaro Canyon fish. For whatever reason, it seems like the Saguaro and Canyon fish, they really love that bigger bait.
Yeah.
They absolutely love it. And they've been conditioned to eat trout for all these years. There's gizzard shad, there's bluegill, there's a lot of big forage in there.
Yeah.
Right? When you go to Lake Pleasant, they also have gizzard shad. There's no trout. They also have big bluegill, but not as many.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed is the size that the Lake Pleasant fish really love eating in that gizzard shad is 7 inches. I've watched them absolutely go ballistic on that 7-inch size gizzard shad. And I've downsized from where I would normally fish like a slice from a 250, and I've gone down to like a Gancraft 178 and bites just like that. And I start just no more messing around. No more like, dude, I had another day where I had 15 fallers and they just didn't commit. Where I'd switch to that Gancraft and they would just bite it. There was no fucking around. They would just bite it.
Yeah.
And it kind of just goes back to like understanding what is your bass's favorite size bait, whatever that
forage,
is, or whatever
they're seeing the most.
They normally see the most because the gizzard shad in Pleasant, they get fucking massive.
They can, yeah.
And they start to act different, and they go to other places after a certain bit of size. And so in that smaller size, those bass feel like, okay, I can eat this without having to exert so much energy.
Yeah.
And it's small, and I can just suck it in, right? While I feel like those fish, they will try and eat a much bigger gizzard shad, but it takes them a lot more effort because on Lake Pleasant, they really like to chase, like you said. They really like to chase. So when a bass is chasing a 10-inch, 12-inch, 14-inch gizzard shad, it takes a lot of work to get because they have to headshot it. Yeah. So that means they have to run all the way up here, turn around, and then eat it while this gizzard shad is flying at like 50 miles per hour. That's not going to happen. But with the 7-inch gizzard shad, they can just suck it and T-bone it, and it kind of just folds up and goes in their mouth.
Yeah.
Anything kind of above that, if they eat it from the side, because the gizzard shad's like that tall, they'll hit it, but the gizzard shad's still going.
They can get away.
Right? But that's much smaller size. It'll just kind of fold in their mouth, and they can reposition it and choke it. So I've noticed on that lake, downsizing works tremendously well. I've also seen on like Saguaro and Canyon and those places, upsizing does get a lot of bites. So it will depend on your body of water and what they really like to key in and feed on and how they just approach different areas too.
Size, action. What I think would be the least like denominator there for me though is color.
Yeah.
I've found them to eat everything.
As long as the
colors people don't want
good.
are great. The colors people want are great. The trout, when there's trout stocks, are great. A bass, like a bass one during a trout stock has outfished the trout ones for me. I would say there's a lot to run down, and the least on that ladder is going to be color. So don't get too caught up on like, it has to be a bluegill. Well, I don't have gizzards. Why am I doing, there's no trout here. I can't throw the trout color.
Right.
Like, no, that's
don't get caught up in that. I mean, when I go out to Austin and I fish Austin, the lake, there's no trout in there, but I throw the Hinkle trout, but it resembles a gizzard shad.
Yeah.
A slide swimmer can resemble pretty much anything, to the fish.
Small bass, whatever. I wish we could interrogate them, shake the shit out of them, like, what did we do? Why did you eat this?
Yeah.
We can't, so all we can do is guess.
Yeah, it's just kind of a guessing game, but the more time on the water, you can start thinking like, I think that's right. Get as close as you can to it. So, like you said, color isn't that big of a deal. I think just those 3 big things is the placement, the retrieve, and sometimes upsizing or downsizing your glide bait will get you bites. I know you also, on your bigger glides, like to add a feather as well.
Yeah,
that was a big thing.
It was. I felt like when I first started throwing those big glides was a time when, again, they would get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
But even then, it was like even a good 8-pound fish would seem to come up to the bait, And like I could tell that like they're really focused. They're not looking at me. They're not looking at my dog on the boat. Like they're looking at the bait. They're real focused on it, and it would almost like circle it, kind of looking like, where do I even plant this attack?
Yeah.
You know, kind of. I've heard Ben Kohler mention like somebody serves you a big huge burger, and you're like, well, that thing looks amazing. I'm gonna eat them and devour it, but like,
which side are you
I don't
doing
know
it
where to
for?
start. Yeah, like should I cut it? Should I grab it here? Should I grab it there? So I think they look at it the same way, where it was kind of like, ooh, I want to eat this thing. It looks like he's injured. Something's wrong with him. Here's my chance. Where do I even plant the attack? And that came from having a few that would like nip on the tail or bang the head. And I started noticing like, oh, well, the Japanese guys, like, slide swimmers at first used to all come with feathers on them.
Yep.
And most people took them off. Like, oh, that's not natural. This is all about being natural as you can. When you left them on, like, especially if you left the front one on, from then on, it was like they didn't spend as much time thinking about where to attack. They keyed in on that feather, boom. And what I like the most, especially on a bigger glide, is like a front hook connection. There's nothing scarier than having them come in from the back hook, and you're fighting it, and there's like one little prong is on the corner of the mouth, and it's like,
to the surface.
Oh no, I'm about to lose him. Whereas like if I see one coming in with the front, and like you said, the back ones maybe
Gets them.
grapple over here, it's much more comforting.
Yeah.
And like you're like gonna land them.
All right, that's about it that I can think of right now.
Just reading the water, time on the water. Let the fish tell you what's going on. Try to, and I get it. Like some of us have big water clarities, some of us have like mud, and you just do what you can. And but time on the water and letting them give you the clues and recognizing what those clues are and how to adjust to them.
Yeah,
it's all trial and error, and like fishing is always just a mass number of decisions. Should I go left? Should I go right? And it sucks that like,
some
hey,
days,
maybe I went left and that was totally the wrong idea. That it was all over here and you missed out. But
that's fishing.
That's the grind.
That is fishing.
That's what you got to do.
I hope you guys learned something. If you guys have any other questions about glide baits or you guys are struggling, give us some examples in the comments and I'll try and get back to them.
Yeah.
If you guys want to book a guide trip with Manny Chee, I will leave all of his information down below if you guys want to get a trip going because the season's about to start.
Never know.
And
we've been skunked a lot, but now it might be changing.
Maybe this is the season,
days.
So
the comeback.
You guys can check them out. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, go out there and chase your dreams.
Yo.